Aaron and Kristen.
Oops, hello.
I see your little boxes, and I'm excited to see Aaron's face because somehow, even though we live in Central Oregon together, I don't see them very often.
How it goes sometimes.
I know, it's kind of ridiculous, isn't it?
Mhm. Maybe I'll switch sides of the table so I don't have that big white blob behind me. Hi, everyone.
We're still a couple minutes in, so we can do some chit chat until we have a few more folks on. Carrie, it's good to see you. How are you? How's your summer been?
So busy,
I can only imagine.
so busy.
Did you get your new vehicle?
Yes, we did.
Holy cats.
It's a used van, but it's working marvelously.
That's
So
fantastic.
we'll still keep the refrigerated truck on the wish list, but yeah, it's a big step up from the back of my pickup for sure.
Well, there you go. Incremental change. Teva, I haven't seen you in forever.
Hello, it's good to see you.
What's going on with you?
Oh, life is all over the place. It has been quite a summer, but it's been good. How are you doing?
Good, good. It has also been quite a summer and starting up with the fall conference season craziness.
Yeah, it's never ending. I feel like every season I'm like, yeah, it'll surely slow down soon. And then it just keeps getting faster.
Are you still have you changed your job role at Black Food Sovereignty Coalition?
I'm now operations manager, which I think had happened the last time I saw you. But
Okay,
I'm operations and grants manager.
gotcha. Exciting. Christy
It's very fun.
Athens, Chantel. Chantel, I haven't seen you in a minute. Good to see you. Willie, it's good to see you. I did just see you though, but it's still good to see you twice. Jim, I'm glad you're on the call. Sarah, good to see your picture of your cute puppy. Jude, I got to see recently. Oh, who else at this looks like
Hi,
Central Coast Food
Sydney.
Web. Looks like a lot of folks. Is that
Yeah, we
Laura?
got four of us here. Hi.
Hi, it's good to see all of you. Oh my goodness. Do we really have a cameo appearance from Lauren Gwynn? Oh, she already dropped off.
It's gonna happen. Okay.
That was going to be amazing. Christy, it's great to
No,
see
I'm
your
here.
face. You
I'm here,
are there. Oh,
Cindy.
you moved in my boxes and I couldn't find you.
I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so excited to see you, like not just last week in person, but now on a Food Hub Network call. It's amazing stuff. Sherry, good to see you. I think I've caught everybody as they've come on. On Sarah's face. And Sarah, I get to see you in a couple weeks. Because it sounds like, Aaron, is it true that HDFFA has moved in with you?
They're moving in October 1st, or I guess September
Woo!
30th, next Monday.
Look at that culmination of years of relationship building right there. Amazing. You must be thrilled.
So thrilled. Well, I'll be more thrilled when I've finished moving my stuff out of their future space. But on Monday,
Oh,
I'll be thrilled.
that's amazing. Jasmine, good to see you. Tracy Harding. Yay for Tracy Harding. Julia Wenzel. Oh, we've got a great lineup. Maggie. All right, y'all. Thanks, Aaron and Kristen, for being willing to talk about this sort of baby trade, food hub to food hub trade network that has been brewing and building inside of this network for about the last, I want to say, 6-ish to 8-ish months. So I'm going to just hand it over to you. I think you guys have a slide deck prepared and a presentation prepared. If not, let me know and I can start peppering you with questions to get us kicked off.
All right, we have a slide deck. I just need to remember how technology works. Give me 1 second.
Remember, I need to learn how it works. Except for I keep getting away with not doing it. So here we are.
Yeah, and Erin and I are going to be tag teaming this presentation. So welcome any questions as we go, or we can also just kind of table things till the end and make bookmarks of things we want to come back to.
And just to cover our bases, I think there might be a couple people on the call who have not interacted with either one of you personally. So a very quick introduction of who you are, like a one sentencer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go first. My name is Kristen Penner. I work as a value chain coordinator for the Oregon Coast Visitors Association on coastal food systems projects. I work as a contractor. My company is North Coast Industries. And yeah, Erin, you want to go?
Yes. Hi, I'm Erin Marr. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the owner and operator of Agricultural Connections Food Hub in Bend.
Awesome. And we'll get this presentation started. All right, so as a little bit of context, we're going to kind of give a little bit of high level background on how this distribution activity got started, where it came from, how it's being funded, and then kind of get into the nitty gritty in the second part of the conversation. So yeah, we are this cohort is a region to region distribution cohort piloted by the Oregon Coast Visitors Association. They're a tourism organization that manages 363 miles of coastline and all the relationships. Inside that, food has become a priority of some of their work in terms of developing economic opportunities for the region and supporting the businesses there. So we are calling this work, it's had many different variations of this name, going from like Ocean Cluster Initiative to now what we're calling the Oregon Ocean Cluster. There are worldwide ocean cluster activities happening where they're doing really creative things of how do we do more with less. So particularly when it comes to our natural resources, yeah, there's only so many fish in the sea. How do we get those fish to land and then to the plates of the people in our communities? How do we make it easier to find and buy local seafood has become sort of our challenge and our pursuit. And how do we get to a place where we're using 100% of the fish through value-added products and otherwise? So we have some really good folks that have come on board to support, and we've been very fortunate to receive some grant funding through USDA and some private foundations. Here's a quote from Senator Merkley just talking about Oregon's fisheries, which are all of Oregon's, resources. And so when we talk about fish, it's a nutrient-dense protein that's right in our backyard, but often doesn't make it across the state to communities that really want it. And so we can go to the next slide. We are taking sort of a 360-degree approach to this. So it's not just like the economic benefits of how local food can revitalize our communities, but also it's a public health issue, getting healthy food to local people, human rights issue when we're importing a lot of the foods that we eat, for seafood in particularly. There are parts of the world where human slavery is still a thing. And so what we have in Oregon are some of the most sustainable fisheries in the world, and really monitored to make sure that labor and fair practices are happening. And then the environmental impacts is a huge one. As we face climate changes, we're really looking at how can we shorten supply chains. And we'll go to the next slide, because that's really COVID kind of brought us to a place where this is a big deal. Like, our supply chains have really been broken. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the Oregon Coast Visitors Association got involved because food is at the heart of tourism. When we looked at the numbers, we realized that visitors to the Oregon coast are spending close to $1 billion on food every year. That's $840 million is spent in stores and restaurants annually, which represents new money that's coming into our coastal communities. Meanwhile, if most of the food that is being eaten here at the coast is imported because we've lost a lot of our farms and processors through the years, that's a huge economic leakage. And so those dollars, as soon as we spend tens of thousands of dollars to attract visitors here, if they spend their money on food that's not from here, that goes out of our community. So we hired a research group to do some more numbers, which have really given us good tools to talk with folks at the legislature and otherwise to help generate resources to start to dig into the problem and address some of the root causes. So last bullet here is, we're a 10% increase in what we're consuming in local seafood on the coast is estimated to generate $90 million for the coastal economy. And that's important because we think about what other industry can, just by changing what we eat, do that. So we've just really been looking at now, how do we tackle how to make a 10% change in really like a lot of our wholesale buyers who kind of become a conduit to people being able to access local food. So we can go next slide. Another really shocking fact is that 90% of the seafood that is consumed on the coast is not from the coast. We're importing that while we're exporting most of what we catch. And partially that's due to other cultures valuing our seafood products more than we do. So there's a huge live crab, Dungeness crab market in China that most of our live crab is exported. And seaweed is a new crop on the Oregon coast, but our culture largely doesn't know what to do with it. So these are some of the ways that we've been kind of digging in and looking at how do we think about how to make these changes. So just a quick timeline. We've Christy, Athens, I see the same challenges, and I spent a lot of time in Eastern Oregon before moving to the coast. And so really seeing that this is not, again, a coastal problem, but all of Oregon problem. So yeah, for our part on the coast particularly, a lot of this work started, I want to acknowledge first that this work has been ongoing for decades, and really we are where we are right now, like being able to make the kind of progress that we're seeing because of all the incredible work that came before us. So really in 2019, just before COVID, on the North Coast, there was a lot of activity that was grant funded, the community coming together to kind of look at this system. And a lot of this conversation was led by producers, like ranchers and farmers who were wanting to grow, but, didn't really have the resources to do so. We applied for a Rockefeller Food Vision Prize, which really brought the community together and put us in through visioning together, put us in a good position to apply for the first round of RFSP funding from the USDA. This is the Regional Food System Partnership Grant, which was kind of really a huge component of us getting started in this work. There were several producer assessments that happened at the same time, land-based and sea-based, which gave us really fresh data to look at what are the needs, what are people saying they need. And a lot of it was, what does a food hub look like on the coast? We didn't really have that here yet. We had food routes and we had North Coast Food Web offering producer services, but not really a lot of physical infrastructure related to helping serve the needs of producers. So that kind of got successfully started. COVID happened. We started doing deeper dives into the numbers. OCFA, the Oregon Coast Visitors Association, was like, how can we start to scale what we're learning on the North Coast down the whole coast? So we submitted an LFPP, Local Food Promotion Program project through USDA, which was funded, that gave us $735,000 for a 3-year period kind of launched our ocean cluster work. And then since then, a lot of that informal work was or formalized kind of some objectives. We wanted to add value to our products. So kind of lean into product development, who had a great idea they wanted to bring to market. How do we, objective 2, increase availability? So there were a lot of conversations that got started about distribution. The Food Hub Club kind of launched in this time period, and Lauren Gwynn was bringing all the partners together to get people excited about and sharing, you know, what we were learning in real time. And so there were little offshoots of those conversations that gained traction and kind of were happening simultaneously. And then the third objective of our LFPP was to strengthen capacity. So really, how do we weave these statewide efforts together? How do we kind of leverage our resources and be more aware of what other people are doing, partner instead of, and find ways to collaborate instead of trying to do it all on our own. Since then, other things that have kind of come up, the Oregon Farm to Institution Collaborative, we'll talk about a little bit later, also funded through USDA funds. Central Coast Food Web and the Yaquina Lab emerged as an infrastructure asset on the coast. Central Coast Food Web is a brand new nonprofit, actually celebrating a year coming up next month. And that organization runs the facility that's been developed in part due to the grants that were received. And then we're in our last year of our 3-year LFPP grant, at which point we still had some funding on the table. One of that increased availability was really looking at how do we coordinate a distribution network, all the people that want to work on this and want to work on it together. We had funded some pilot routes, but we decided to just kind of pool some of the dollars we had left to fund a cohort, fund the participants to actively participate and share data. And so that is kind of what we're going to talk more about the rest of the presentation. So next slide. Yeah, I think I kind of went over all of this, but really, we as a team and as a community really wanted to start getting into what's working, what isn't, and how can we kind of do more of, find ways to do more of what is working. So next slide. Yeah, I think we kind of talked about this distribution network. Had come up so many times in the producer assessments. I want to just kind of go back to the fact that we were not going into this blind, but you know, in the needs assessments, transportation continually rose to the top of what producers were facing challenges with, right next to how do we develop markets for our stuff. And we realized within the Food Hub network, we had partners that wanted to get more seafood into their communities and have that offering. So we decided under the umbrella of seafood that we could really explore some of how that could happen in real time. Yeah, so I think I'll just hand it over to Erin to kind of talk about how that has evolved over the last 8 months.
Yeah. Kristen, before I start, I noticed a question from Amy in the chat about HB 3410 on the timeline. Can you speak to that a little bit, or you want to wait until later on that?
No, that's great. I was realizing I forgot to add that we were a little last minute in getting our presentation together, so that should definitely go on the last year. Yes, we were able to secure legislative funding the same year that the Food Hub Network did for their Food Hub grant program, which has been really interesting to have these 2 buckets of funds that can help fund some of the infrastructure that we've so desperately been needing. This kind of came from a Coastal Caucus member, a representative, heard about this work that we were doing and came alongside us as a champion and took it and worked it into a bill. So we received $1.19 million for funding, which is for infrastructure technical assistance. And I can talk more about that towards the end, but thank you for bringing that up.
Okay. So all of that is the background on especially the AQUA side of how this cohort happened, which is critical because that's how the cohort was funded. And the goal of the work from the beginning was primarily around being able to distribute seafood, but also since we were working with a large number of food hubs, or small group of food hubs across the state, how we could also distribute the products that were grown or raised or produced in those regions as well. So the key kind of problem we identified for the cohort was how can we efficiently, effectively, and consistently connect small producers and buyers across the state, with a few specific hopeful outcomes from that. Of course, increasing access to food and to a diverse range of food that's grown in Oregon, increasing market access for producers, and also business viability for the hubs and the producers. That came up a lot in our initial conversations, was just, why do you want to reach other regions? Well, because my business needs to be able to continue to grow in order to be sustainable, especially as costs continue to go up and the world continues to change. And then another key thing that came up a lot that again we'll touch on later and is related to the OFIC work is there's this kind of gap for many hubs and producers where they're really close to wanting a larger customer, wanting to reach a larger customer, but they might not quite have the capacity to do it. And so the hope was that by being able to be more connected, we'd be able to more reliably able to meet the needs of larger buyers and therefore bring them more into local food purchasing. This is a full list of our cohort members. It's a range of different types of groups. We've got nonprofit and for-profit hubs in here. We've got seafood producers. We have some really amazing consultants that were incredibly helpful in keeping us all wrangled and also looking at the big picture. And we also have well, I guess Marion Acres is also a hub. We really wanted to focus on having members who were doing some kind of distribution or who had the capacity to do some kind of distribution, at least in their local region, if not beyond. So coming into it, most of the hubs had refrigerated vehicles, had routes that they were regularly running. The two seafood producers, Treyfin and Port Orford Sustainable Seafoods, were running much larger routes, but much less frequently. And so the goal was, how do we get these groups connected and also then beyond? We had a pretty basic standard working group structure that I think we kind of fell into over time. This was a project that came together really quickly, and we all wanted to hit the ground running. So we had a steering committee that mostly met at the beginning of the cohort to try to get us all on track at the beginning and recruit members, and then has been meeting again at the end to make sure that we get all of our reporting done, we get all our takeaways in place, we follow up with people about how it worked for them, all of that good stuff. And then most of the time of the cohort, we had monthly meetings of the full cohort. These were hour to 2 hour, usually around an hour and a half long meetings. And at the beginning, they were much more structured and much more about finding our common ground and understanding where we were all coming from. We came up with a collective stake, which you can see at the bottom, which I think was a good way for us all to just make sure we were on the same page about our goals. But then later our meetings became a lot more loosely structured and just kind of people giving individual updates about what they were working on, new opportunities that had come up, bringing small things to troubleshoot with the group, making sure two individual organizations were getting connected if they needed to get connected. A lot of our work ended up happening not necessarily in those meetings, but in one-on-one connections between cohort members and then their connections as well, to actually get purchases done, actually get food moving. And the cohort kind of functioned as accountability and support group, and reminding us all to make the time for this thing that we find very important. And then just also, when we had a stumbling block, often someone in a different region would be able to say, have you tried reaching out to this person? Have you tried this way of connecting? And that could be really, really helpful. We've been in the kind of wrap-up stage recently, so we've got some reports on sales and connections and contacts and all of that. This work is also ongoing, though. The group has kind of all collectively decided to keep working together, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But we're technically out of our funded period, but we're still all connected. We're still all moving product together. So that is, I think, hopefully a good sign for the group at large and its success. You can see at the last bullet point here what Chris was talking about our rush slide, because I realized as soon as we started presenting that I didn't finish that slide, but I'll still run through what we've got here. So I've got some really wordy slides coming up. Feel free to ask questions in the chat or jump in if I'm talking too fast or being unclear, but I wanted to get some real nitty-gritty in front of you all about what we actually successfully did and what worked and what didn't. This isn't by any means everything that we did, but I wanted to at least get like some examples in front of everybody with numbers and all of that. So yeah, shout out if you have questions or things are unclear. So I'd say our most successful regular connections are the ones listed here. And they're interesting, I think, because they're totally different ways of finding connections with each other. So Kiara at Gorge Farmer Collective and I started doing pretty regular sales to each other throughout starting in last winter and then into this season as well. And the way that we found that worked really well for us is to do a backhaul through OGC. We considered doing direct drive, like one of us driving a route to the other, and that was going to cost us somewhere around $500 a route. Whereas we can move a pallet through OGC pretty regular. We can do that on a more than one time a week if we wanted to. We're doing it not more than that. But we can move a pallet for $55 between Bend and Portland. So that's a really cost-effective way for us to move the product. And it happens to work really well with our operations just because of the timing of deliveries from Gorge Farmer Collective already going into Portland, or their farmers already going into Portland, and OGC already coming into Bend. It's just able to flow really easily. And so this is one model that, like, I think if you're trying to move product from your region, yeah, sorry, thank you, Christy. Organically Grown Company is OGC that I'm talking about. They have a warehouse in Portland, they have a warehouse in Eugene, and they do deliveries all across the state. They do a delivery route into Bend 3 times a week, and so I'm able to do backhauls from them to Portland or from Portland. But yeah, this can be a really great model if you're trying to move product around and you're willing to pay a per pallet fee. Obviously, our concerns with this are that we fill up that pallet as much as possible, but given the relatively low cost, we're able to be a little bit more flexible about how much we're moving regularly and still keep that going when we need it. We definitely don't do it every week. We've done it I think 8 times throughout the course of this project, and we probably will do some more this fall and winter. But yeah, that's been incredibly successful, and I think is a really useful model if there's already a larger distributor that's really willing to work with you, has values aligned, and already on those routes. That can be really great. There's similar distributors elsewhere in the state. I know one that's come up a lot is Rogue Natural Foods has some routes that I believe they do some of this on as well, and there's others too. Then moving on to the second regular connection, which is a totally different model, North Coast Commons, and who I believe Chantal's on the call, and Kiara's driver from Gorge Farmer Collective met up regularly in Portland, and this was a direct relationship where a driver met a driver, or a driver dropped off an item in the same day. Usually it was picked up from a cross-dock location. Again, having a partner that is affordable and meets all of the infrastructure needs is really important. So they used Beeline. Either they would meet up in the parking lot of Beeline, or they would do a cheap brief cross-dock for $25 at Beeline, and that has been really successful. That we even were able to connect through that Tillamook to Central Oregon by having some product that North Coast Commons brought to Portland, then Gorge Farmer Collective brought to Hood River, then Gorge Farmer Collective was able to drop for an OGC backhaul to me. So we've been able to extend the routes from there. This kind of model is, again, great when it just works out and is really convenient that there's already routes happening. it's been one that we've tried to make work more for other routes and has been more challenging just due to so many scheduling constraints, cost restraints. I think it's still something that we're trying to make work better, but I think the key thing there tends to be the cross-dock infrastructure, because that really makes it so much easier to make different schedules work, because you don't have to be in the physically the same place at the same time, and that requires obviously space, the right kind of equipment, but also a cost that makes sense for everybody. And then speaking of cross docks, another thing that's worked really well is Shelley at Lane County Bounty in Eugene has been able to offer cross docking for a number of participants in this project, and has allowed various routes to connect through Eugene. So Ag Connect drives to Eugene on a monthly basis. Klamath Grown goes through Eugene semi-regularly. Treyfin and North Coast Commons have both made trips there. All of that has allowed there to be drop-offs of fresh produce or fish that get picked up by various other people and get circulated into their communities, and that's been hugely helpful. And Shelley's infrastructure at Lane County Bounty has been really critical to make that happen. One thing I should have mentioned earlier that's a challenge with organically grown companies specifically, and can be a challenge with working with other distributors, is what they're able to move. So for example, we're not able to move frozen fish right now through organically grown company cross docks or backhauls. Whereas Lane County Bounty, we are able to do that because they have frozen infrastructure and they can accept the fish. So that's a key kind of finding the right fit. And then my really clear last bullet point, fish. The other kind of regular connections that have been working well are the Treyfin and Port Orford routes that already exist, just kind of getting them hooked more into the food hubs that are near their routes, on their routes, that can pick up from a location that's on their route, something like that, so that there's then more access to that product in that region. Most of that's been direct to consumer sales, but most of these hubs have also kind of developed or have the capacity to hold a decent amount of fish for in between their delivery routes, so that there could potentially be more sales happening in the region to wholesale partners or institutions or schools. And that's something I think everyone would really like to develop more. Christie, they ideally would like their drop-offs palletized, but we have done drop-offs where we just give them the product and they've palletized it for us, and they haven't charged an additional fee for that, which is very kind and great. But yeah, as long as it's kind of a reasonable amount of product for one pallet. Those tend to be the smaller pallets that they're doing that for. I'm not sure they'd be as happy to do it if it was like a very full pallet load that was just in crates or cartons. I'm actually going to pause there and ask if there's any specific questions on those connections and those kind of models that I talked about so far, because I just threw a lot.
Holy crap, I'm so jealous. So with the pallets, like, are you using a forklift and using a truck that's big enough to handle a pallet, or are you pulling it apart?
None of us have forklifts. When I get the delivery in, it's dropped like in my warehouse and I'm able to just pallet jack it, so no forklift needed. And I can take down or leave the pallet from there. I believe the OGC warehouse, when Kiara has been receiving it, has been able to just put it directly in her truck on a pallet. So her truck is big enough to take a pallet, as is mine. But none of us have forklifts, and a lot of the times the drop-offs at OGC are not already palletized, and they've been able to work with that.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you.
Lauren.
So first of all, this is amazing work in so many ways. I'm just so impressed with all of this very specific. Food is moving across the landscape and it's working. And this is so many things could go wrong. And you're setting it up well and you're executing well. So all of the organizations listed in here, you've been developing relationships of trust, and you know that you're on the same page and you're trying to make it work over time. OGC may be impressed, but like they can't really afford trust unless they really know it's going to work. And this is a major shift from where they were when I was talking to them about stuff years ago. What do you think was the most important thing with OGC to say, yeah, let's do it?
That's a great question. I honestly don't know that I can answer it particularly well, because it seemed like when we asked this time, it was just the right time. Like, there's now a person at OGC who manages these kind of logistics, and it's very straightforward. It's just like a quick, like, hey, I have a pallet this week, is that cool? And they're like, great, it'll be on your delivery. And that's really all there is to it. So it seems like whatever you were doing before, maybe it finally got in there, but I can't really speak to what changed, because they just seem like ready to do this. And I wonder if there are other people who are requesting this often enough that it just became a regular thing.
Well, I think what you're seeing is readiness inside them, readiness with you. You know, you all have no problem speaking the language and understanding why all those things are important. And also a shift outside of you to make this more like, duh, of course you could do this. When there were so many like, well, duh, you wouldn't do this before. So that's great. You know me, I ask those big picture questions. So thanks for that answer. It's a great one.
Yeah, I wish I had more details for you.
Yeah, I want to just
I think
kind of jump
Go ahead,
in.
Kristen.
There's a lot of like chatter going in the chat right now. So we'll be sure to come back to that. I want to point out like AdConnect had a long-standing relationship with OGC as a buyer. So I think there was sort of a pre-existing relationship to tap into. And I think one of the things we found, Shelley from Lane County Bounty is another example of someone who has a personal relationship with someone in OGC, which has opened up opportunities. So finding those folks that already like hold those relationships has been really key, and just kind of let's have one point of contact, you know, to kind of make things happen and kind of sped things up a little bit too.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to add. Yeah, I'm trying to scan through the chat, but I think we can kind of come back to these later for the most part. If there's any other things that are directly on this stuff, though, shout out. Okay, I'll keep going. All right, one of the things that I saw in the chat was about Southern Oregon, and that was one of the key trials that we did multiple rounds on, and I think got closer to finding sustainable solutions. Might not totally be there yet, but certainly learned a lot. So specifically, we knew from very early on that we wanted to try to get tray fin product into Southern Oregon. Klamath Grown knew they wanted to be able to sell the product. Tray fin, I believe, has already had contacts with schools in Southern Oregon, might have already even been doing sales, and it just was looking for a more regular and consistent way to do that distribution. So there are a few different ways we tried to do this. The first one, tray fin drove all the way from basically just past Astoria in Washington all the way down to Ashland. So it was a very long trip for them, but they were able to drop product for Klamath Grown, who was able to pick it up from their Ashland drop spot and bring it to their operation and sell direct to consumer. That all went well in terms of like coordination and logistics and communication, but the costs of that route for tray fin were just too high with the volume of sales that they were able to do in it. And so that was, you know, kind of rejected as a sustainable option, at least without quite a bit of sales growth going into Southern Oregon. Southern Oregon. So in the second trial, tray fin transferred product to North Coast Commons by Astoria, and then North Coast Commons delivered into Eugene. And I believe North Coast Commons in this might have literally been Kristen Penner. I'm not 100% sure, but but was able to drop at Lane County Bounty, which that part worked out pretty well. Similarly, we were able to get product from Chelsea Rose Seafoods to Lane County Bounty that I was able to pick up in Eugene. So that kind of part of it was working well. But then again, the ability to get the product from Eugene into Southern Oregon didn't really work out, and that became the challenge point. And Northwest Commons ended up driving it all the way down, which was not sustainable as a long-term solution. Again, in our third trial, tray fin delivered themselves to Eugene to Lane County Bounty, and Klamath Grown picked up the product there. And that was the most successful so far, in that the route costs were split between two different groups. Klamath Grown had onboarded a driver and a delivery vehicle, which was like a huge step in being able to make this work. They also had other sales or pickups happening in Eugene to help cover the cost of that route. So all of that was really valuable. Still, the volume wasn't really there to make it a regular route. It worked in the individual, but the let's do this every week or every month wasn't quite there yet. In our last trial, Trayfin again delivered to Eugene and Lane County Bounty. We were able to wrap that in with sales not only to Klamath Grown, also to Agricultural Connections, and also to I believe 2 schools in Southern Oregon. One of whom was able to pick up from Lane County Bounty, which was still acting as a cross dock, and the other one was able to meet up with the Klamath Grown team when they were driving from Klamath Grown to Bend, which they were not just doing to deliver this fish, but it worked out really well that they were already coming this direction and were able to do some deliveries, and then they were also able to do some pickups. Oh, Abigail's saying that it maybe didn't actually work. Well, I'm really sorry about that, Abigail. I didn't hear that part.
Now we have a system, but yeah, they forgot to drop off
No,
our
that's
order.
so disappointing. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, system's in place now though.
Systems in place. It does seem like that method at least was a little more effective if all of the fish had made it onto the vehicle. Mostly because, again, it was being wrapped into existing sales or pickup routes, and because for Trayfin, the amount of sales that they were doing to bring the product to Eugene was like a more sustainable amount. So hopefully that's something that we can kind of solidify on a regular cadence and bolster up in between, perhaps with some capacity to store product in between, so that there's enough to last until the next regular recurring cycle. But there are still some challenges. I mean, the volume of sales is always a concern on all of these routes, basically, unless they're something that's happening really cheaply or on a completely covered existing route. And also, as Abigail said, and beyond that, the distribution into Southern Oregon is still spotty, and the capacity to get product beyond Klamath Falls or Klamath Grown is where like a lot of the growth would need to happen in order to access some of those customers that would make the routes more sustainable. I'm seeing exciting things about possible other Southern route options in the chat, which is very cool. I wanted to call this out just because, not because anyone involved, not because anything went particularly amazing or particularly not amazingly, or anyone, made huge mistakes, mostly just because like this is the kind of trial and error and learning and figuring out the systems that I think is time consuming and challenging, but also kind of needs to happen in order to find the best thing that works for multiple different groups that are all having different costs and benefit analysis to make when they're doing these routes and timings and all of those factors, and figuring out exactly like what is sustainable for each group can take a lot of steps and be challenging. Yeah, Amy.
Yeah, this is just amazing. I really appreciate you sort of kind of walking us through this roadmap, Erin, of like the coordination of all of these logistics between the buyers and the hubs and the suppliers like Trayfin. I guess I'm curious, what kind of, so one of the things we're working on right now at ODA is a plan for some of the state funds that we have through the Resilient Food System Infrastructure federal grant, I should say, not state funds, federal funds, to support a lot of the supply chain logistics around the state, specifically projects like this and many others. And something that occurs to me just based on what you've been talking about the last few minutes is the technology or systems, operating systems that would really be helpful for you all to have with the chain of custody of the product from supplier to buyer, and making sure things like, a delivery, like, Abigail was saying, like, there was a delivery missed. Are there systems that you're already testing or working on with these projects, or are there technology or other systems that you would like to have available or would like to utilize, or would even, you know, also, I mean, think about even the training that would be required for that. I mean, those are also the types of costs that we could potentially help fund with these dollars. So I guess I'm putting that out to anybody too, but just in this example, you could even just answer from this example too that you've provided.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Kristen jump in on technology in a second, but I would say that everyone was using whatever tools they were already using, and there was not a kind of unified technology that we were all using. So we communicated, through email. People put orders into their own systems. It was just kind of like left to the individual parties to figure out how to do it, which is, contributes to things like an order being missed for sure, because there's not that double checking and there's not that ease as well. And just seeing the orders as clearly. So yeah, more technology to centralize that would be incredibly helpful. And I'm gonna let Kristen take over there because she has some thoughts on this, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a big puzzle. And we're still figuring it out. So there are options. The group, we'll call this out a little bit later, but the group really had found some success using Slack to communicate. We didn't really realize that maybe we should have been using that as a group till the end. So more trials to come. But it was working really well for North Coast Commons and the producers that they were serving to organize around and have everything in one spot and not lost on email threads or text messages that someone forgot to ping the right person on or add them to. So it was just kind of like one spot where we could go back to the information. It also really helped that we just Google Docs and documenting as we went, just the notes of the conversation and like go back to what did we say last time, and sort of the regular cadence of meeting was really helpful. So I know I didn't really get into much more of the tech. There's a lot out there that remains to be explored, and we're excited about that. But as Erin mentioned, it was the timing of this project, and to kind of speak to some of the comments I see in the chat, we had a short runway. We knew that we wanted to just kind of hit the ground running with some folks that already had started very early, transactions with each other, and also had a van that was on the road. So it was hard to think about who do we start with, and just think of this as a first step to get some initial data and kind of try some things, and then expand this work out to include all the other folks that are doing really incredible work around the state. So I want to kind of also just put a big shout out to Chrissy Athens and Erin Maidlow and Abigail Blinn and all the folks that really were willing to have some one-on-one conversations with me kind of early on in the cohort to kind of talk about their situations. That has been heard and received, and it's not something that we could do everything all at once, unfortunately, but we tried to just use the time that we had to kind of just focus in on some routes, which clearly still have some gaps too. We know that folks are moving food from Portland to Eugene, but it's very fragmented, and it's so I think we're all ears if people have a solution that's working. And that's one of our invitations to this group is as we think about where to go forward from here, how do we want to approach this together to make it easy? Or if somebody's found a way, would love to hear it and just kind of keep building on what we're learning together.
I'm seeing the time, and I'm going to kind of keep moving. I don't have a ton left in here, but keep shouting things out if you have questions or thoughts. So this is kind of a summary of where we ended up with the routes that we were able to trial, or were not able to trial, as it were. The black lines are tested and true transportation routes. So things were moving between those groups regularly on some kind of cadence. Regularly could mean anything from weekly to every 3 months, depending on the needs of the organizations involved. But some kind of regular route was.
Are we supposed to still be seeing your slides?
Uh-oh, yes.
Or I'm not.
I see them.
Oh,
I
okay.
see
Maybe it's just me
too much.
somehow.
I
If
see
you
that
all see
it's
them,
like a
I'm
toggle at the
good.
top.
Okay,
I think you have to
cool.
show that instead of like the meeting screen, Erin's screen.
Got it. Thank you.
Hopefully, everyone else is seeing it okay?
I
You
can
find
see
now,
it.
Tanya? Okay, great. Yeah, so that's what the black routes are. The purple rectangles, Beeline, OGC, and Astoria Food Hub are non-cohort regular partners in either transportation or cross-docking. And then the red lines are the routes that are like sorely needed and are not currently totally figured out. So the Southern Oregon route we were talking about from Eugene down south is one of those, even though it's probably the closest we got to any of these red routes. Finding something that worked for them. And then, and a kind of odd, unexpected route that we had some trouble with was between Eugene and Portland. There's a lot of people making that drive, but finding a way to make that really regular was a bit of a challenge. And then, of course, to Eastern Oregon is a really big area that we were not even able to trial. We like really wanted to, and that didn't pan out during the process, the 8 months we had. I'm sorry, Christy. We're still working on it. Our total sales in this period, in the 8 months that we were operating, were $45,673. It's probably a little bit more than that because I don't think everything truly got captured in there. Some of it was not the most easy to estimate, just given the lack of a centralized technology that Amy was talking about. But most of that, in terms of value, was seafood, and then vegetables, fruit, and value added were also important. And I think the kind of importance of specialty value added stuff coming from each region became also an interesting piece. Like, it was so easy to up the value of a pallet going one direction or another, delivery, by being like, oh, what else do you have made in your region that I don't have? So cheese became something that people were looking for a lot, dairy, butter, other kind of specialty value added items, especially things that were shelf stable, were like a really great way to make sure you're getting your money's worth on your transportation costs. And then we've already covered quite a bit of this, but the kind of two primary challenges that came up again and again, cost versus sales capacity is really the biggest, most challenging thing to finding a regular sustainable route that's run by a small producer or a small organization. Particularly Southern Oregon and Eastern Oregon, but even the more the routes that were more covered, if they weren't being done through a relatively cheap cross-dock or a relatively cheap delivery service, then that became a really big concern, is how do we make sure that this route that we're driving weekly is penciling for us. There's a very cool route cost estimator that I believe Anna Rose developed during this project that was really useful, and I think that's going to be available publicly, and we'll, I'm sure, share it once it is. But we did some costing of routes for a couple of the organizations that were involved, and just seeing like how much it actually costs to run a route can be really it's very useful information, but it can also be a little bit daunting, I will say. Having those regular accounts that you can rely on, and I think schools can be great for this, so can other institutions, so can larger buyers, but it's hard to make that. You have to be reaching a certain volume of like direct to consumer customers or smaller restaurant customers in order for that to really make sense. Whereas having like one kind of, it's going to be sustainable because you have this customer who wants something every 3 months or something like that, is much more easy to see how it's going to work for you. The other, as I kind of said a couple of times, the other like key way that this can kind of just be made unnecessary is finding an existing distribution partner who's has the capacities you need in terms of locations and infrastructure and cold storage or frozen storage or whatever it is, to be able to do the distribution for you and make use of trucks that are not all the way full, and makes it just a lot more financially viable. And then, of course, managing schedules and communication. Lots of small organizations, lots of very busy people, lots of not having enough time to properly coordinate things, or not properly coordinate things, but not having enough time to like really talk things through all the way, or getting it done in time for that route to make sense, or whatever it is that became a recurring thing that we were dealing with. So Slack hopefully will help us with that. Also just getting to know each other's routines and schedules and the kind of rhythms better has been helpful. But just the human level of timing management and capacity management, but then also like the infrastructural ability to transport the volume or transport the type of product or store the type of product or the volume. All of that, matching that in terms of timing of routes, regularity of routes, and volume of customers is something that is really key to making routes work and is harder in some places than others. Okay, last one. There's still work going on in this area. It's by no means completed or even close to it. All of the cohort members are still in contact and are still doing sales and distribution together. We have a Slack that we're doing that in, and also still communicating in other ways too. Not currently a funded project. Hopefully that'll change. We'll see. But even in the meantime, it still seems valuable for us to continue to work together. And most of the regular routes have capacity still. So the ones that we've figured out. So if there's a product or producer that you need that needs distribution help on one of those routes or close to it or has the capacity to link up to it, definitely let us know. If you know someone who's driving one of the needed routes regularly, I saw some of that in the chat. Amazing. We would love to kind of get that information all linked up. But yeah, get in touch with us if that's something that you are interested in. And then kind of related initiatives, the Oregon Farm to Institution Collaborative. One of the working groups is the Value Chain and Aggregation Working Group, which is chaired by Kristen and myself, and is supporting efforts for larger institutional sales, which could again include transporting product throughout the state to be able to reliably meet that need. We meet monthly. It's a working group that has a kind of similar vibe to it as the region to region cohort did, of like a bunch of people who really want to make things happen, kind of giving each other updates and troubleshooting together about what their current needs are. Our next meeting is this week on Thursday, so feel free to reach out if you're not on the invite for that, and we can add you. There's also a really excellent seafood to schools working group that Maggie, who's on this call, is a part of, and just met today. I think they meet every 6 weeks, and again, very like action oriented, helping people troubleshoot, make those connections. Abigail is also a part of that. It's really excellent. So I recommend getting involved in any of those ways if this is something you're interested in knowing more about. And also we have a lot more information than even I just threw at you just now, and we'll have a sustainability report which we'll send out as soon as it's ready to go, along with any tools or links that we have available at that point. And I think that's it an hour later. Sorry. Oh, and if there's any obviously questions, I'm happy to continue answering them, and I'll try to catch up on the chat too.
Erin, I had a question about so I know that the funding that you've had has created the, paid for the time for this convening and all of the effort of understanding and engaging this group of folks and figuring out some of these routes. Outside of that, for any individual producer or any individual hub, are the sales that you're making, like for example, what you're making to Gorge Farmer Collective, the costs associated with managing that sale, do you have a sense of whether or not that is something in and of itself that's sustainable if you were able to grow enough sales? Like, what is that feeling like to you? We all know it's really important and we're all really into it, but is there a future that you can foresee where that's just part of your business model?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think yes, that's part of, I can foresee that future pretty easily, especially speaking as a Central Oregon food hub. Like, we have such a short growing season, as Sydney, you know very well. And we have, very little access to things like fish. And so bringing in product from the outside, I think is probably critical to having enough variety and enough season for the hub to be for AgConnect to be economically sustainable, if I could speak. So I do foresee that being a continuing part of my operations. And I think that Kiara might be on this call and can maybe jump in, but I think that there's similar like clear economic reasons for it to make sense for her as well, where like her farmers tend not to have much in the way of season extension type storage crops. And so there's like is a real specific financial need for the hub that's being met by purchasing out of region. Also, one really easy thing for us is that coordination time for that specific route is really low. And so that's much easier to make a part of the operation. And especially now that we've done it a few times, than for some of the other routes where it's much more about like building up enough capacity on the route that the sales really are meeting the threshold of the actual cost and also the coordination costs. So for me, absolutely. For other routes, I think it becomes more challenging, but there are, I think, clear similar economic pressures for everyone to be able to access more diverse products that are still Oregon, are still local, and are still sustainable and ethical. But yeah, I think also it'll get slightly more complicated when we're not funded, in that like there becomes a lot more pressure on price, and so that'll be something that we'll all continue to navigate as we try to be good partners to each other, but also have to take care of our own business needs and our own producers.
Hey everyone, this is Kiara. I'm driving and I have to hop off in 1 minute actually, but I just wanted to chime in and say like, aside from like bringing in winter storage crops and keeping our customers engaged, or bringing in winter storage crops from Central Oregon and Erin to keep our customers engaged all over the winter, like we're a fruit economy out here, which like fruit doesn't really have much of a comparative advantage like selling locally. And so being able to make like those larger like peaches and apples and pears sales to other parts of the state is a wonderful way to export fruit in a way that it's not like international export to Brazil. And yeah, and now I have to hop off. Bye.
Thanks, Kiara.
Yeah, Tanya.
I was just curious about like where OGC sits with this, and I guess just thinking about those sort of I put in the chat, but like to Sydney's question and what Amy asked about earlier, like what kind of systems could help make it essentially more like make the economics work better in terms of like managing the sales. And I'm just wondering if OGC could be like could offer any advising on that in terms of their expertise, but I don't know how, if there's a fine line there in terms of where they would not be supportive. So I was just curious if that's come up at all, or like what kind of like, I guess thinking about both, I said like the human systems, but also like technology, and obviously I think they're sized a whole lot different, but some things I would imagine seem like they were small once, I guess, is where I'm thinking.
That's a great question. Kristen, you're hopping off me. Do you have something to jump in on? That's a great question. We have not asked them, and that's really interesting. I think that I had just in my head been like, well, that starts to get into the competition line, but potentially not. I mean, they are, mission driven and like trust funded and all that. So I think that's definitely something to consider. I'm interesting.
When we're ready to have that larger conversation with OGC, Aaron, Kristen, I have a couple of contacts within that group that is outside of your regular sales contacts, both in the founders group and with I think it's their current VP of logistics. So we could probably have that conversation at a different level rather than working your way through the sales folks. But I think we need to be really, really clear and ready with our ask. And I'm not sure we're quite there yet.
So I wanted to see if anybody has other questions. You know, we're happy to, I personally am happy to hop on a call to discuss more with anyone that wants to do a deeper dive, or again, you know, some of these distribution conversations, sales opportunity conversations are happening within the OFIC working group, which is it is a funded project. Like there's coordination that is being funded for another year. So there are places where this conversation can continue in one form or another. So if there aren't any other questions, I just want to do a time check. Are we still on till 2:30, Sydney?
Yeah, you can have as much time as you need. The discussion that I have is very much secondary to the importance of this discussion.
Okay, I just wanted to maybe see if Maggie was available to share a couple things about the Seafood to Schools group. If you wanted to, I would say that is a group that's, as Erin mentioned, is very action oriented. It's another place where you can just sign up to attend the calls or just be able to get added to the Google folder or group to be able to check up on the notes. They're discussing things like product development ideas of like, how do we get more local ingredients into products that schools want to buy? Or what's the right pack size that makes sense? And those types of sales, I will say, to schools, like those were some of like the core basis for some of the routes and things that we tried, because schools have dollars that they have to spend every year on local foods. So identifying the foods that are available, there was interest in proteins for sure. And so we've, you know, it was really great that we have a shelf stable protein that's available now to schools that kind of went around the the need for frozen distribution. So that's got a life of its own. Maggie, if you have anything else to add, or if anybody wants to be added to that, let us know.
No, I mean, I feel like you summarized it perfectly, and a lot of the same issues that come up. And again, I'm like a newer member to this group that ODA and ODE has been shepherding for years or a year and a half. Is just that we know that schools have these farm to school dollars to spend. We know that they want protein. Oregon landed seafood from small to mid-sized producers is such a, it meets all the needs, it ticks the boxes. But in truth, as I actually just said to Kristen on the call earlier, it's like, we have to get them the fish, you know, it's the same conundrum. And so as this R2R group has been working, and I've been fortunate to be able to sit in on that, it's not similar conversations, but some of the same crossroads that we find in our Seafoods to Schools group. So again, extending that invite to folks on this call who you might be the like problem solver that has the puzzle piece that unlocks the magic. And we can find, you know, group crossover and hybrid crossover, because as we all know on this call, it's a, you know, it's a wraparound situation. And so I extend the invite that Kristen and Erin posed.
Thanks, Maggie.
Now you've done it, you guys. You've become the experts on hub to hub network connections. And so too bad, we'll be asking you all kinds of questions forevermore. This is a really well-designed project. And I really appreciate that from the outset, you two understood that you needed to be able to report out on what you learned and be able to build on it. This is incredible work. So just, y'all should be proud of you.
Thanks, Sydney.
Yeah.
Other questions for these two? Oh, go ahead, Erin. Sorry.
I was just saying, I mean, we very much did not do it alone. There's so many people in the chat right now and who are not also who we couldn't have done it without. So shout outs to literally everyone who was involved, whether they were a participant or not. It was a really energizing group to work with and to continue to work with. As is, I will say, this group. So and I don't think this would have been possible without the Hub Club. So that's also thank you to Sydney and the Hub Club.
And Kristen, thanks for being innovative with that bit of funding that you were sort of squirreling around with, trying to figure out how to make fish move. This was a really innovative project, so it's really cool. Other questions from folks while we have Erin and Kristen thinking about hub to hub trade networks? Amy Gilroy.
Well, I just wanted to add, I guess, an accolade for Kristen and Aaron because with the seafood, with both the combination of the work of the Seafood to Schools group and then also this project, we have seen just a tremendous uptick in seafood purchases, particularly the shelf-stable tuna options for schools. And so I think it's so we're seeing them for the first time probably in the last 10 years, just in the last couple of years alone. Most of these seafood purchases have started really happening among schools. So, I just think that's a testament to this project and also to Maggie and others on the Seafood to Schools working group. I mean, local proteins are in high demand among schools, but I think for reasons people are mostly familiar with, those purchases do tend to be on the lower side because of price point. So, that's why it's really important as we're thinking through not only how we get these products around the state, but which products are most cost effective for those types of buyers to be, focusing some of our public dollars on that as well. So we do have some funds that we set aside every biennium to do some product evaluation and product redevelopment for seafood and other food makers who might have products that are maybe they're interested or curious about the farm to institution markets and would like to do some discovery work with the Food Innovation Center and ODA, and we provide a lot of that guidance on getting those products evaluated for schools and get them, sort of in the right recipe formulation, but also the right packaging and quantities that meet the school meal patterns and credits. So that's also just something to keep in mind as you're working with different types of producers that we're always interested in. Again, we set aside those dollars if we don't spend them working with producers on making products for schools, we need to figure out, where else to spend them, but that's really what they're designed for. So if you have any questions or you've got a producer that you think might be interested, please send them my way to do that kind of initial assessment and consult with them. But yeah, we're really excited about the seafood work, and I think there's going to be even more. There's all sorts of products now that we're talking about, and there's lots of energy towards working with the tribes and doing some tribal fish product or ideation and product making. So it's just really great. Good work, everybody.
Yeah, I just like in closing, I want to just, go back to like where this all started, like Lauren getting everybody in the same room to talk about these issues, so important, and finding, like, I think for me personally, like seeing all the ways that these resources kind of are available, but this collectively, how we can start to design with the end in mind to be able to stack those resources together to get more done. And that's just been like the highlight of this group for me personally. So thank you.
All right, y'all. Any other questions for Kristen and Aaron? I think that was like the best presentation we've ever had on this call, honestly. I really think that was one of the highlight presentations that we've ever had on this call. We've had lots of folks and we've had lots of great folks, but I think that was incredibly relevant to why all of us do this work in a way that, it isn't always. So thank you. And Chantel, I'm so glad to see you on this call because I know you have been a part of this group as well. So this is fantastic. Really appreciate it. Any last questions for this group before we talk about the things that we've been buying and our shiny new toys and what we've learned along the way? All right, shiny new toys. A lot of you have gotten some shiny new toys or have money for shiny new toys. And I'm curious, we're probably going to revisit this topic a few more times over the next few months because we're going to continue buying shiny new toys and we'd like to help each other. I'm curious for those of you who have actually purchased things and are starting to bring them into your hubs, how's that working out? What did you not anticipate that you wish you had anticipated? What have you learned along the way? So I know there's at least 2 people on this call that have gotten funds and have purchased something, Carrie and Christy, both of you. I'd love to hear from you. And I think Erin Maidlow, you're on this call too. And I think you've maybe received some of your shiny new objects. So let's hear it. Let's open up the floor. Carrie looks like she's going to tell us all about it.
Yes, I'm happy to go first. I'm so grateful for the funding that has made an enormous difference in our ability to support our local producers, especially with our closure of our OSU Extension office, because there is no other agency in our area, in our county, supporting small farms. So yes, we have a new 2-door reach-in freezer and a reach-in refrigerator upright that allows us to hold at a different temperature than our walk-in. So that's been really helpful. And then we have, I would say, 90% of our new processing kitchen completed. So we got the floor sealed, the plumbing is in. We had to run a whole water line from another building. It's insulated, drywalled, and RFP'd, and we have a 3-compartment sink, and we have these rolling stainless steel tables that have been really helpful because it's our pack house has turned into kind of like a multi-purpose room. Like in the morning, it's a pack house, and then in the afternoon, it's a farm stand, and then the rest of the week, it's sort of storage. So we're constantly moving these mobile stainless steels countertops and work surfaces around for multiple different uses. So, and we bought a van, a delivery van, which was huge. It took me like 6 months to finally find one, and we had to ship it down from Idaho. And but yeah, it's working really well. It wasn't our perfect solution, but it's a definite huge step forward, beyond using my pickup truck. And I want to introduce you to our new staff, one of our new staff members. This is Chad CV. He's our new market and food access manager. So, and his position was funded by Oregon Health Authority. So together with Oregon Health Authority, Oregon Food Bank, and OCFSN, we've had some major strides in infrastructure support. So much so that I was invited to speak at the county commissioner's office last week, which was terrifying, but they were ready to listen. So I told them where we're at.
Did you learn anything unexpected when you were, say, buying your vehicle or as you were building out your kitchen? Did you come across things that you were surprised, or did you have to change your operation or how you do your process flows in ways that you hadn't anticipated?
Yeah, I really did work with my ODA inspector from the onset in our design, and she was so helpful in kind of planning ahead for things like painting the floor before you bring in all the appliances, otherwise where else are you going to put them? So things really did need to happen in a certain order. It looks like we really are going to need a stove, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I think we're looking for other alternatives because it's just not going to happen, I don't think. And then I should have covered the ceiling. I didn't think we needed to cover the ceiling, but we're gonna have to go back and paint it. I thought the code requirement was just to cover the walls with a washable surface, but you have to include the ceiling too. So we're gonna have to go back and do that. And just make sure you measure really carefully because I put 3 sinks in and my inspector wants me to put 2 more sinks in. 1 for food prep, 1 for hand washing, and 3 for container washing. So now I have to figure out where I'm going to put 2 more sinks. But appliance wise, we have a freeze dryer. And I got the medium sized one, which I'm glad we did, but it's so much bigger than I thought. Like it's not something my producers are going to be able to check out, which was my original vision, and take home. It's 200 pounds. Like they're going to have to come here and use it. Chad and I could barely lift it together. And then we have 2 dehydrators and a vacuum sealer, which have been are going to be really helpful for post-season processing that's going to help us build some more inventory for our fall and winter pantry and reduce food waste. So thank you again.
That's super helpful, Carrie. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Sharing the hiccups along the way. I mean, there's no project that doesn't have hiccups. I have been involved in a million projects, and every single one of them has hiccups, ranging from hiccups to disasters. It's totally normal. But the beautiful thing about this particular network is we can share what hiccups we had, and maybe, you know, the next person will paint the ceiling before they brought in all of their equipment, and now they have to drape all of their equipment and shut down their kitchen to paint the ceiling for a few days. So thanks, Carrie, for sharing what you've learned along the way. Who's next? I know there have been other things that have been purchased, and I am behind on the chat. So who would like to share their learning experience? Christy Athens, did you learn anything? Oh yeah, I saw your hand go up. Yes.
Hi, sorry, I was literally just on the phone with the delivery guy for the, so he's gonna be here at 3, so this works out perfectly. So I missed the very beginning of the conversation. We're talking about what we've done with our funds.
What I'm really wanting to know, I kind of know what you've done with your funds, but what I
Oh.
really want to know is what you learned about what you've done with your funds. When you
Got
started
it.
bringing in your equipment, what were you like, sure wish I'd known that before that freezer showed up. That would have been helpful to know.
Well, I will probably have more input in a week when this lock-in is functioning, hopefully functioning. I guess there were a lot of you know, unless you're building a building from scratch, which, you know, some people are with their food hubs. Most people are retrofitting an existing space. I had to do things like pay to move. There was a conduit that couldn't get buried behind this walk-in, and so it has to get moved out of the way. It generates a lot of heat, and so I'm having to install an exhaust fan for summer. For winter, it'll actually be great because that's an unheated space, and that will keep the freezers moving, which I learned after I bought them that they're supposed to be in an approximately 7-degree ambient temperature, which they won't be. A lot of the time they'll be in, because it's in the shop that's unheated, but now the walk-in cooler will be heating it. So just stuff like, you know, what actually needs to happen to the existing space to make everything fit.
Did you end up with any process changes? Did things work the way you expected them to in your daily operation, or did you suddenly find yourself needing to do things differently because you brought on this new, bigger piece of equipment? Or
yeah,
any
well,
other
again, that
changes?
will I will have more to say in a week, but yeah, happily I am getting to change some of my systems, because right now my system involves Tetrising produce in 2 shitty tiny refrigerators and trying to get everything to fit, and not being able to use produce box. I would take everything out of a produce box because I can fit maybe 1 produce box in the refrigerator if I move the shelves. So I'm really excited about the changing systems. And also I got bigger freezers, and so now same thing, instead of Tetrising frozen blocks of meat everywhere, every kind of meat has its own section, and the producers are all separated, so that's fantastic. So for me, it's all good changes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing about the
Yeah.
waste heat. I think Lindsay from Food Roots can relate to that. Carrie, it looks like
happy
you
it's
have a
over.
comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that if I was to do it all over again, I think I would appreciate some like technical support in hiring contractors. I did my best, you know, I collected multiple bids and I checked references, but I really had problems with my plumber. And it really slowed down the project. So if I was to do it over again, I would try to include that technical support in how to properly interview them. What should a contract look at? Because some of these contractors just like texted me a number and I'm like, no, we need a contract. And some of them were just an estimate. And then when damage occurred underground, there was this question like, who's going to pay for that damage? Like, ask all those questions up front. So you know, because if there's something that could go wrong, it may. In my case, it did. So I just wanted to add that on.
Yeah, that's helpful feedback generally for everyone, but also for me as, you know, as somebody who took a big role in designing this program, is maybe we need to think about some of those things if we're looking at projects that are doing things like shifting around plumbing and electrical, which can become pretty complex pretty quick. So thanks, Gary. Other folks who've brought on new equipment. Aaron Madlow, have you brought on your new equipment?
No, because we got the ODA USDA grant, not OCFSN.
That's right. Okay. Sorry.
So all of us are just in limbo waiting, but I'm excited when we finally do. That's why in the comments when other Aaron was doing their presentation, I'm curious if you replicated that in 6 to 12 months, once everyone has all of our equipment, what that will look like, because I think it's going to really boost the transportation and hit a lot of those areas that are highlighted in red.
Yeah, it'll be really exciting to revisit some of this in a year as the RFSI funds and the Food Hub Network funds have all gotten on the ground and we've expanded so much of our infrastructure. We have time for one more if there is one more, or if we have one or two more questions, because we have been chatting today. Anyone else?
Would add more help, and you know, we did have the one workshop of learning about refrigeration equipment, but more of that, I would say, because I almost bought a brand that turns out isn't that awesome, and I almost bought a unit that I would have outgrown almost immediately because it would have been too small. And I just, I'm an English major. Like, I don't know. I really shouldn't be
also,
doing this
you're
stuff.
a Food Hub expert. but point taken. I think
Yeah.
to improve this for both our next round of Food Hub funding and funding that looks like this in the future, as you guys are bringing on your equipment, whatever you're bringing on, please share your experiences with me so that I can help anticipate. That will help me anticipate what are the technical assistance needs that you're going to have as you're, I wasn't thinking my folks are saying I want to walk in and they don't know what that means. I now understand that my folks are saying they want to walk in and they may not know what that means. So for the future, please reach out to me as you're discovering these things so that we can design a better program or design better technical assistance to go with that program. That is what this network's for. So I appreciate all of you, those of you who've experimented and that we're having the benefit of learning from. We got a dehydrator, freezer dryer experience share. But yes, please just keep dropping in my email. drop it in these chats, wherever you can do that, please do that. That's helpful. Anything else we want to get out while we have all of us together, or shall we move along with our days? Thank you, everyone. Kristen, Aaron, thank you so much for sharing. Christy and Carrie, thanks so much for sharing your experiences as well. Have a good one. See you next month.
Thanks, everybody.